presentation. Sorry about the change of plans, but no worries. We're going to get the same information, the same experience. So we're going to delve a little deeper into food. So the thing I want to emphasize here is that there is so much information and science about food and nutrition. And I had no idea as a physician that through my training that there is so much science out there. It turns out there's 99,000 new nutrition science papers published every year in the scientific literature. And a great many of these studies have fascinating findings. So most of us in the medical community are more or less oblivious to the vast majority of the science because we don't study it. We just don't get taught that information in the course of our college courses, our pre-medical courses, our med school, and our residency. So to learn this stuff, I have found this resource of Dr. Michael Greger and his website, nutritionfacts.org, to be invaluable. What he has done is really astonishing. So he's got thousands of nutrition videos on hundreds of topics, and he just shows the science. He more than anybody has his arms around the totality of that science. So he can not only speak to an article and say, this is interesting and here's what they found, but he can speak to the context of that article and where this sits relative to the other papers in the field. So great resource there. To make up for this lifelong neglect of nutrition information, I think it's really valuable and worthwhile enterprise to go and study it. It's fascinating. It has direct implications on our lives. It's hard science. And so toward that, we've mentioned a couple of the documentaries, the Game Changers, What the Health. There's a number of them. They're not all perfect. I would say the Game Changers is as nearly perfect as any of them is. But there's a lot of good information in these documentaries, Food Inc. and Forks Over Knives. There's a whole host of good books. There's a host of not so good books too. A lot of when you read a lot of the subpar books, they'll speak to an interesting finding about coconut oil and tell you, so start spooning down the coconut oil. But they don't look at the totality of evidence around coconut oil that says, you know what, coconut oil is actually not healthy. It's rich in saturated fat, and there's evidence that it raises cholesterol and doesn't have all these health benefits that people want to have. So there's a lot of wishful thinking among the books and information sources and web sources out there with nutrition. So I think it's important to stay close to the science. Hence my affection for nutritionfacts.org. So if you look at a traditional curriculum in school, K through 12, there's not much health and nutrition. I don't know why. It's not as if we don't have bodies and health isn't an important thing and there isn't a childhood obesity epidemic, but nonetheless, we spend a lot more time on math and rocks and minerals. Well, in my opinion, this is what it should look like. Lots more health and nutrition. So there's a plug for studying the field. We shared this statistic last week that through the Global Burden of Disease Survey, one of the largest survey of its kind, looking at what are the causes of death and disability worldwide, they found that the dietary risks are by far the #1 contributor to early death. And if you look at the top 7 or so, the majority of these factors are dramatically impacted by our food. So the high blood pressure, the high fasting blood sugar, the high cholesterol, the high body mass index are all a function of eating that pizza and those foods that we're so accustomed to. Tobacco is now #3 on this list. Air pollution makes the top 10, but mostly it's all about the food. That's why we spend so much time in this Health Challenge Delaware talking about food. So the dietary causes of death, further breaking it down, the Global Burden of Disease Survey is able to, as best they can, estimate what is causing those deaths from nutrition. And it turns out, interestingly, #1 on their list is too much sodium. Excess sodium, according to this scientific organization, is the #1 contributor to early death. Now, why would that be the case? Why would it be sodium? Well, for a variety of reasons. One, sodium raises blood pressure. And two, sodium is a marker for highly processed foods. We get most of our sodium from processed foods. So if you're eating a lot of salt, you're eating a lot of processed foods. But a close runner-up is whole grains, of all things. So we talked about the 5 food groups within the whole food plant-based diet. Whole grains was one of the afterthoughts that we listed at the end, but it turns out it's top of the list as far as its ability to avert early death. A diet low in fruits was number 2. So a lot of people avoid fruit because of the sugar content, and I think that's really misguided, partially because of this and partially because all the other science that shows that fruit is healthy. Fruit does not lead to obesity. Fruit does not cause diabetes. Nuts and seeds are next, followed by the vegetables, followed by a diet in seafood omega-3, which we can talk more about. But there's an emphasis in here as well on the omega-3, the healthy oils. Note that they're not as important as the whole grains and the fiber-rich sources, but seems to be important. Diet low in fiber is down a little lower. Legumes, surprisingly to many, is sort of bottom of the list among those food groups, but still far more important than too much red meat, too much processed meat, and too much sugar-sweetened beverages. So there you have it, causes of death. The causes of disability look very similar. You have this diet low in whole grains. Actually, whole grains take the number 1 spot. So what a lot of people say, I'm not so worried about death, I just want to have a good life. And that's what this tries to answer. You know, you want to live a life free of too much chronic disease, being wheelchair bound, going from doctor to doctor all the time, and that's your whole life, hospitalization after hospitalization. So if you want to avoid that, a diet low in whole grains is the main problem to overcome. But otherwise, very similar list with sodium and whole grains at the top 2. So let me give you some of my strategies. If you count, there'll probably be 17 or maybe even a few more. So one of them is vitamin B12. We mentioned this several times, and I think it's because it's so easy, and I just don't want to have anybody get B12 deficiency. It's actually a rather common problem, and there's fairly serious consequences of being vitamin B12 deficient. Briefly, if we were to eat vegetables like they look on the right, nobody would have a problem with B12. B12 comes from bacteria, from dirt, or dirty water, but we've sanitized our environment. So take a B12 every day. Salt, we talked about. Salt kills. This is from the American Medical Association. Here's the proper way of checking your blood pressure, but it mainly kills because of blood pressure. Make sure that you're not talking when you check your blood pressure. You shouldn't have a full bladder when you check your blood pressure. We don't do it right in the office. It turns out that the blood pressure you read at home is more valuable in terms of estimating your risk than the blood pressures we get in the office. So please do check your blood pressure. The research is very clear. It's a little controversial, and partially because industry funding has really kind of contaminated a lot of the science that we hear about with regard to salt. But bottom line is the less salt, the better for the vast majority of us. It's very clear that the more salt you eat, the more cardiovascular or heart disease you can develop. It was for every 1,000 milligrams of increase of sodium, there's a 17% increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Where does the sodium come from? Well, for youngsters, it's mostly pizza. And that's no surprise if you've seen kids these days. They seem to eat pizza about 5 to 6 days a week, and often 2 meals a day. For those of us in the middle-age years, it's chicken, and chicken doesn't naturally have high sodium, but chicken is so heavily processed with sodium being supplemented or injected into the meat that it becomes our number 1 source at that age. And then bread is at an older age. Actually, bread overall is our number 1 source of sodium. So beware of bread. Bread is a processed food. It's made of flour, which is highly processed grains. So in general, if it has a label, then beware and read that label, because the label can tell you some of the information about what's the problem with the food. Is this a healthy food or not, as far as the sodium is concerned? Well, I'll tell you a little trick. You'll notice it has 210 calories. So it turns out we should eat roughly the same number of calories per day as milligrams of sodium. So 210 calories, but 890 milligrams of sodium. So beware of the sodium in this can. So we love canned beans. We think they're wonderful, but I would recommend pour off the water and then give it a rinse to really try to get that sodium down. It's too salty. There's a great book written called The No Pressure Solution, which reviews a lot of the science around what lifestyle things can we do to reduce blood pressure. Another principle I'd like to speak about relates to the microbiome or the gut bacteria. Gut bacteria, we're learning through some fascinating emerging science just in the last few years, are very important to our health. So this is a great book called Fiber Fueled that summarizes it. There's a number of other very good books in this field. But basically, to summarize, the gut bacteria, it turns out, outnumber our normal cells by 10 to 1. So in a sense, it's been argued that we're only 10% human and 90% bacteria. They're almost all in the colon. And when you eat food, it almost all gets digested before it reaches the colon. The only thing left over is the fiber. The problem with the American diet, it's so deficient in fiber, so we have sort of starving gut bacteria. We foster the unhealthy versions of the gut bacteria that only can feed off the lining of our bowel, and which causes leaky bowel, and also it's a pro-inflammatory state. So to get all the benefits of that healthy microbiota, you really want to eat that rich fiber diet. I showed you last week that the more fiber you eat, the less diseases we get, from Alzheimer's disease to heart disease to breast cancer to diabetes. We live longer. Fiber is super healthy. But to summarize the main point of that book, Fiber Fueled, the main contributor to how healthy our microbiota is, those gut bacteria, is the diversity of plants in our diet. Diversity of plants, diversity of plants, diversity of plants. The more different kinds of whole plant foods you can eat, the healthier are the bacteria in your gut, and the healthier you will be, because they will reward you with all sorts of anti-inflammatory healthy things. There is another important element of a whole food plant-based diet of optimal nutrition is the antioxidant content. And in my opinion, this is something we don't really learn about with food. When you think about food, you hear about you hear about how much protein it has and how much it'll help you grow big and strong, and you might be aware of how much vitamins it has, vitamin C, et cetera. But there's this host of other chemicals that are important to our health that we don't quantify as easily. There's so many of them. And one class of these are called antioxidants. And they're important for preventing aging, preventing heart disease, preventing cancer. And this essentially pictures many of the antioxidants. They tend to be darker colored fruits and vegetables, the dark green leafy vegetables, in particular the berries. Spices and herbs are an important source. I've pictured turmeric here, which is the king of the antioxidants and arguably the most potent antioxidant-rich food in existence. Amla is the richest of all the fruits. I say amla. Amla is a powdered version of Indian gooseberry. So you don't learn this stuff, and it's not commonly consumed, but these are important foods to emphasize in the diet. Another important food to emphasize in the diet is water. Water is so important. Many of us don't drink enough water. I recommend 2 glasses of water at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's important to stay hydrated. If you drink it before the meal, it can reduce your hunger and give you all sorts of other benefits. There's research showing that kids given water before a test perform better. I think our brains work better when we're well hydrated. But it's not just about the water that we drink, it's also the water we eat. This research looked at what is it about the foods that fills us up and makes us full and makes us stop eating and makes us not overeat. And we all know that protein helps increase your satiety. You eat a burger, you're going to feel less hungry than if you just ate the bun. But it turns out that fiber was more satiating than protein, and the water content of the food was even more so, was the most predictive of how satiating a food would be. The fat content was negatively correlated. In other words, the more fat a food had, the less satiating it was. And it's interesting, when you look at standard American foods, the things that jump out at you, number one, they're they're very dry. You know, when you look at chicken nuggets or pizza or burgers, it tends to be very dry. Bread, very dry food. So they lack that water. They certainly lack the fiber. It's been refined out of the flours, and there's zero fiber in meat. So the standard American fare is it's got protein, but other than that, it's really designed to not increase satiety. Now, which food has the highest satiety index by far? It was boiled potatoes. Dramatically more filling than the other foods tested. Potatoes often are vilified by people. I think the problem with potatoes is if you deep fry them, if you add a whole lot of fat, a whole lot of salt to them, they become unhealthy, which is the way we eat most of our foods. I think the #1 vegetable consumed in the United States is French fries. But if we would just boil them instead, you would get lots of healthy nutrition. You would get filled up. We wouldn't eat nearly as much fat and salt. Now, here's a great book, The Starch Solution by Dr. McDougall, which goes into, he really emphasizes the benefits of just about any kind of natural starch, especially he holds up potatoes. Populations have survived for centuries on eating almost potatoes alone. So they really do have almost everything we need to survive. I want to emphasize I don't want to leave drinking and beverages without mentioning the powerhouse of green tea. There's all sorts of research speaking to the benefits of green tea, from preserving cognitive function because of its rich flavonol content to boosting immunity. Some interesting research showing that people who were randomized to drink green tea had about half the rate of influenza infection. Most of this research is done in Asia or Japan, where they drink a lot of green tea and they really honor it for its medicinal properties. Here's an interesting practice. This is the wacky world according to Dave, but some very good research on gargling to prevent infection. And in particular, the gargling, in a small study of children, the gargling green tea was the most effective at preventing these children from developing upper respiratory infections. So there's also research showing that, by the way, green tea is an effective mouthwash, even more effective than chlorhexidine, the main chemical version of mouthwash, which, by the way, causes all sorts of, it appears to be somewhat toxic. So I think green tea, the reason that you can't go and buy this stuff is because it's dirt cheap and nobody's going to make money from you gargling green tea. So you're not going to see ads for it. The ultimate mouthwash and gargle is green tea with amla powder mixed together. I actually do this every night. So talk about crazy, wacky world of Dave. But this stuff, I figure this is a healthier mouthwash. You get some antioxidants. I'm doing the decaf version. Amla is kind of bitter, so it's hard to eat. This is an example of a great video on nutritionfacts.org. Again, there's thousands there, but you could watch this video and learn about this green tea and amla and these natural mouthwashes. But combine that with the idea of gargling, and you've got yourself a COVID preventer, let's hope. Another important concept of nutrition is calorie density. The plant foods tend to have much lower calorie density. That's how many calories per bite or how many calories per cup. So when you eat a certain amount of food, how much is it going to cause you to gain weight? And what we see with the animal products and with the processed foods is they're much more calorie dense. And that's largely why people crave them, because our bodies crave calorie dense foods. There's a lot of us who really don't have much nutrition skills. We're really accustomed to everything that hits our palate is calorie dense, calorie dense, calorie dense foods. And if you were to give somebody something like a potato, they'd be like, yuck, this tastes like cardboard. And it's just because they've been trained over the years to develop a taste just for calorie dense foods. And the problem with that is there's health consequences long-term. So we can be just as happy eating the more calorie dilute foods. We just have to get used to it. In Chef AJ's Secrets of Ultimate Weight Loss, which actually is a very good book from the perspective of someone who's struggled with her weight her whole life, She takes this concept of calorie density and puts it in a chart and basically says, eat to the left of that red line. And that's basically the whole plant foods. That's even avoiding nuts and seeds because she finds them to be, to have the potential of causing food binging because they're so calorie dense. But it turns out, so of the plant foods, they're almost all to the left of that green line. We do have nuts and seeds, which are rich in calories because of their oil content, but they seem to be overall pretty healthy and overall not to cause weight gain for most people. Avocados are a little bit to the right of that line, but you'll see the processed foods, bread, being very high calorie dense. So intact whole grains, as we explored, are the number one or number two dietary element that we can add to our diet to reduce our long-term risk of death or disability. And there's a whole host of whole grains. The important thing that I'll emphasize is the more intact, the better. Whole grains are a little bit different from the other foods. The more you process them, the more you grind them up, the less healthy they become. Beans are different. If you cook beans and then mash them up into refried beans or make a hummus out of them, they are perfectly healthy. They haven't lost their fiber. They haven't lost their nutrients. But if you grind up, let's say, oats into a flour, you've taken something that's incredibly healthy and made it incredibly unhealthy. So pictured in the top left is oat groats. This is the original form of the oat. To the right of it is steel cut oats. You process them a little more, you've got rolled oats. Processed more, you've got instant oats. And the bottom right is oat flour. So the oat flour has a high glycemic index. It tends to cause weight gain. It can cause food binging. Whereas when you eat the groats, you're getting the maximum amount of fiber. Oats are deserve special mention because they are so healthy, and that oat bran has all sorts of beneficial properties in lowering cholesterol. On the left, you can have real pretty overnight oat recipes that you can make, and there's hundreds of recipes online for overnight oats. On the right, you've got my ugly version, which is taking advantage of that concept of diversity of plants. So I put about 7 or 10 different kinds of grains and seeds in there and in the Instant Pot. And I always have that for breakfast every day. There's always an Instant Pot ready, as does my good wife, Dr. Zarek. We eat that with berries and with banana and with, I add balsamic vinegar, but that's another story. Omega-3. So one of the reasons why I think fish gets mentioned as an important source of health is because it's the main way that people get omega-3. But if you know which foods to eat, you can get a lot of omega-3. I have measured my own omega-3, and I have the highest omega-3 of any patient I've measured because I eat a lot of flax. I eat flax every day, flax plus chia in my breakfast. Whenever I'm cooking with nuts, I tend to substitute walnuts. If you're making a recipe, and this is a really good strategy, make a recipe where you blend up blended cashews with lemon juice and nutritional yeast to make kind of a cheese sauce, for example, an Alfredo sauce, or blend up nuts with salsa to make a queso and nutritional yeast. Well, instead, I always substitute walnuts because they're by far the healthiest nut. They have a pretty significant anti-cancer effects that have been measured in the science. Dark green leafy vegetables. We could talk for days about dark green leafy vegetables and their benefits for our health. They're arguably the healthiest food we can eat. And here pictured is like a spring mix. By the way, many of you are probably aware that these are available in the grocery store for about $5 a pound in these large containers. And we go through many of these large containers per week. So eating large quantities of salad. This is my lunch every day, is to eat a salad like this. I fill a Gladware container, a half gallon of salad. I wanted to give you a visual that the standard American approach to salad is wrong, in my opinion, in a number of ways. One, it's too small. The salad is like a side salad. It's a tiny little thing. Two, the foods that they put in there are like cucumbers and a tomato and maybe a slice of onion and iceberg lettuce. You're missing out on many antioxidants. You're not getting nearly the diversity of plants. It's that mix happens to be relatively low fiber. I put all sorts of stuff. You see on the left side, you see broccoli sprouts, but the red onion, the tomatoes, and it's wonderful. Broccoli sprouts, by the way, is something that you can do. If you're going to sprout, this is the thing to sprout. And I always have broccoli sprouts available. It's really fascinating. You put 3 tablespoons of broccoli sprouts in the jar, and then you just rinse them every 12 hours. And at the end of 4 days, you have a jar full of broccoli sprouts. It costs about 80 cents to get a quart-sized mason jar full of broccoli sprouts. And each little nugget, each little mouthful of those broccoli sprouts is eating like a head of broccoli in terms of its nutrients and its anti-cancer. So 2 vegetables merit special attention. For obviously vegetables in general are super healthy, but the king and queen of the vegetables is the cruciferous vegetables, especially broccoli, it turns out, especially broccoli. And then secondly is garlic, is the bulbs, especially garlic. And these have been found to have good anti-cancer effects and all sorts of other beneficial effects, including immune benefits in the case of both of them. It's been speculated they might even help prevent transmission of diseases like COVID-19. Salad dressings, beware of the creamy ranches. You put a little bit of that on your salad and you're eating mostly creamy ranch dressing with a side of greens in terms of calorie content. Try to get to where your dressing adds to the nutrition, doesn't take away. I'm a big fan of balsamic vinegar. You can get the fancy ones and the flavored ones and fruity ones, and they're wonderful. And then the other thing that pictured at the top is nutritional yeast. This is a powerful ingredient that actually is a fungus like mushrooms and has its own kind of class of nutrition that you don't get from any plants or any animals. And there's evidence that nutritional yeast also boosts our immune system. At the bottom is herbs and spices. So some combination of those can be wonderful. I recommend fruit as your #1 snack food. 10 servings a day is not too much fruit. You can't really overdo fruit. There is all sorts of evidence that we don't develop diabetes because of fruit. We don't gain weight because of fruit. On the contrary, fruit is a rich source of antioxidants. These are wet foods containing and perfectly satiating. There's evidence that eating an apple before a meal can have negative calories in the sense that it makes you eat fewer calories than you were going to eat. And let's not forget beans. So legumes are a central part of the diet of the blue zones where people live to be 100 at 10 times the rate of the rest of the world. Beans, it's what's for dinner. So beans are versatile. You can do all sorts of stuff. You can make wraps, you can make bowls, you can make bean dishes, you can make soups, you can make paella, you can add sort of stuff to it, you can blend them, and you can flavor them, season them any way you want. So hopefully we're learning about beans. You might not want to jump in and eat all these beans in one day all of a sudden because you might pay the price for it. You want to ease into beans. And the last tip, the last skill I will mention is time-restricted feeding. So if your goal is to lose weight, in addition to eating this wonderful plant-based diet that I mentioned, which is so low in calorie density and has so rich in antioxidants and is so healthy, you also want to be mindful of when you eat. It turns out the same meal, this is fascinating, the same meal eaten at dinner time or later in the day is more fattening than if you eat that same meal at breakfast or earlier in the day. And it's also more causing of diabetes. It drives you to your body toward more insulin resistance when you eat later in the day than earlier in the day. So it is better to front load your calories through the day. But bottom line, the earlier you can stop eating, the healthier the weight you're going to have. So if you can shoot for 7 p.m., I've had people stop eating at 6 p.m. on a routine basis. The key is you don't want to go too hungry. We don't recommend long-term trying to go hungry. You should not be hungry. And sometimes people are unsuccessful switching to a plant-based diet because they say I was hungry all the time. Well, that means we just did something wrong because we're talking about eating more food, not less food. So to summarize, we emphasized that you want to try to eat low salt. You want to eat less processed foods, largely because of the salt content, but because of the oils and because of the flours and all the other unhealthy stuff in processed foods. You want to try to eat as much high fiber as you can. Ideally, every bite should have its natural amount of fiber. The diversity of plants, important concept. Rather than having just one kind of grain, have 2 or 3. Rather than having 3 things on your salad, try to have 6 different things on your salad. The water content of food is important. The water that we drink, ideally the main beverage that you're going to drink through the day is water. You want to try to emphasize potatoes, especially boiled potatoes. Baked potatoes are not much different than boiled potatoes, but potatoes without the deep frying and without all the salt and without all the sour cream are a very healthy food. Green tea is a superfood with many benefits, including boosting that immune system. Think about my trick of mouth washing and gargling with it, ideally with a little amla sprinkled in there as well. Trying for that low calorie density approach, and when you eat these foods pictured, you can't help but do it. It's very hard to fill up and overeat when you're eating things like salads and bean dishes and whole grains. Oats are an important component of our diet, especially in breakfast. Flax, chia, and walnuts are the top sources of omega-3, and probably especially flax should be emphasized in our diet such that we eat it most days. Greens are critical. The darker, the better. Broccoli is one of the very healthiest foods there is. Broccoli sprouts is even healthier still and can be created, and you can be a farmer creating broccoli sprouts all through the winter, and it's fun and it's rewarding. Vinegar merits special mention because of its ability to help you burn fat. Nutritional yeast and mushrooms are an important nutritional ingredient that have nutrients you can't get anywhere else. All sorts of benefits, including anti-cancer and immune boosting. Beans, 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 the wonderful fruit. The more you eat, the longer you live. And stop eating by 7 p.m. So we talked a lot about nutrition. We didn't delve into the other pillars of lifestyle medicine, those other important areas. Hopefully you've made some changes in these areas too that you can explore with your mentor and your group. And we will have time in the future to discuss these in more detail. I just wanted to remind that our next session of Health Challenge Delaware is going to be a week from today, 6 to 7:30 p.m. Nutrition myths and facts. So we're going to talk. We're going deep into nutrition. We want to give you a lot of tools for nutrition. And if time permits, either next week or the following week will be more exercise and sleep. And with that, I have finished my talk. Karen, I hope I didn't go overboard.
No, that was awesome, Dave. Thanks. And I believe I have everyone assigned to a breakout room. If anyone is in the wrong room, you should be able to come back to the main session and then tell me where you should be, and I'll get you to the right place. So here we go. You're going to have 20 minutes to meet with your mentor, talk about the progress that you had over the past week. Then we'll regroup and hear from Marianne, Heather, and Sophie. And then you'll have some more time in your breakout sessions.
Thanks, Karen.
Yep.
Am I supposed to go somewhere, or do I just get there?